England, 1942. The air is heavy with fog and salt. Searchlights carve pale wounds through the night sky above the channel. In a low bunker near Dover, the hum of machinery fills the silence, the steady pulse of British radar beating against the darkness. Across the sea, in occupied France, the Luftwaffe's early warning stations come alive. Green screens flicker to life inside the Würzburg radar rooms. Technicians, young and weary, stare into the phosphorescent glow as echoes crawl across the glass. One blip, two, then 20. The operator adjusts the dial. The sweep returns, and suddenly the screen erupts, hundreds of signals where there should be only a handful. The voice crackles through the intercom. Herr Hauptmann, the display, it's full of ghosts. Laughter answers him from the command post. Ghosts? The British don't have ghosts. They have targets. In Berlin, over cigars and polished oak tables, a general grins with cold confidence. They think they can hide from German radar? Let them try. His men nod, certain. The Reich's radar net, precise, infallible, unblinking, has never failed them. That night, over the gray expanse of the Channel, the bombers come. Hundreds of RAF planes glide under the moonlight, their engines a distant, rhythmic thunder. Below them, radar stations buzz with confusion. The scopes bloom into chaos, shimmering clouds of false echoes, an electronic storm. On the screens of the Luftwaffe, England vanishes behind a wall of noise. The defenders are blind. And as the first bombs fall over Hamburg, somewhere deep underground, a German officer whispers, "It's as if the sky itself has betrayed us." What they didn't know, what no one in that bunker could know, was that the catastrophe they witnessed wasn't a failure of their machines. It was the beginning of their own blindness.
It did not begin in a grand factory or a secret fortress, but in a cramped laboratory filled with cigarette smoke, chalk dust, and restless minds. England, 1941, a nation cornered, its cities burning, its skies ruled by precision. German radar networks, the Freya and Würzburg systems, had become the mechanical eyes of the Reich. They could see everything. They could track anything. And for the Royal Air Force, that meant death. In that crucible of desperation, a small group of scientists at the Telecommunications Research Establishment sought to break the spell. Their leader, a quiet man with sharp eyes and sharper wit, Dr. Reginald Victor Jones, believed that the answer to invisibility was not power, but confusion. His proposal was absurd in its simplicity. If the enemy's radar sees by reflection, why not give it too many reflections to see? The idea was to drop thin metallic strips, each one carefully cut to half the wavelength of German radar. For the Würzburg, that was precisely 25 centimeters. Strips of aluminum, falling through the air like metallic snow, each a tiny mirror to the radar beam. To the generals, it sounded laughable. To pilots, suicidal. You want us to fly straight into flak and announce our position with tinsel? The idea was shelved, revived, shelved again. Tests failed. The strips tangled, scartered unevenly, or drifted away before the beam could strike them. Sometimes they blinded British radar instead of German. Even Winston Churchill hesitated. If the Germans learned of the trick, they could use it too, and then both sides would be blind. The proposal was buried beneath caution and bureaucracy. The war pressed on without it. Yet the experiment refused to die. In a small, unheated office in Malvern, a physicist named Joan Curran, young, precise, relentless, began cutting strips of foil by hand. Her colleagues laughed and called it Curran's Christmas. She kept working anyway, calculating wavelengths, testing angles, matching the rhythm of the radar pulse. One afternoon, as the foil drifted through a test chamber, something strange happened. The radar screen began to bloom with light, echoes expanding, multiplying, filling the scope with impossible targets. For a moment, no one could tell what was real and what was reflection. The scientists looked at one another in silence. They had not built a weapon. They had built madness. The project was given a code name, Window. Simple. Ordinary. A name that concealed the storm it would unleash. No medals, no headlines, no cheers. Just a quiet understanding between a handful of engineers that the sky, from that day forward, would never be seen the same way again. No one imagined that this crude experiment, dismissed, mocked, nearly forgotten, carried within it the seed of victory.
Winter, 1942. The war had entered its cruel middle age, every invention a gamble between salvation and ruin. In a cold airfield in Lincolnshire, the men of Bomber Command loaded their aircraft for another night over the Ruhr. Amid the bombs and fuel drums sat a few bundles wrapped in brown paper, unmarked, unremarkable, and forbidden to mention. Inside, the first operational packs of Window, each strip cut by hand, stacked with mathematical precision, and packed into small parcels to be thrown from the bomber's hatch. The pilots were briefed in whispers. The mission? Test the impossible. Drop the foil and vanish from radar. As the engines roared to life, doubt filled the air as thick as the exhaust. "If this doesn't work," one navigator muttered, "we won't need to worry about the return trip." The aircraft took off under a moonless sky, their silhouettes crawling across the clouds like silent ghosts. As they crossed the French coast, the first bundles of Window were tossed into the wind. The foil scattered, caught the moonlight for an instant, then vanished into the dark. In the radar rooms below, German operators watched and saw everything. The screens showed no confusion, no chaos, no ghosts. The bombers shone as bright as ever. The Würzburg sets tracked them flawlessly, feeding coordinates to the flak batteries below. The sky erupted in orange fire. A pilot's voice crackled through the intercom. "No difference. They see us. They still see us." Another responded with bitter humor. "Maybe it only blinds accountants, not radar." The mission was a disaster. Several aircraft failed to return. Those who survived landed in silence. The experiment was logged and filed, another line in the long ledger of wartime folly. The official report, dated December 17, 1942, was merciless. Effect negligible. Visual interference only. Radar remains operational. Recommend termination of project. At the Air Ministry, the reaction bordered on ridicule. One bureaucrat joked that Britain had invented the world's most expensive snowstorm. The scientists were ordered back to conventional countermeasures: chaff dispensers, radar jammers, decoys. Window was to be shelved indefinitely. For the Luftwaffe, the test was proof that their technology remained supreme. "The British are fighting with tinsel," a German officer laughed to a correspondent. "We are fighting with science." And for a brief, bitter time, it seemed he was right. The dream of invisibility had fallen to earth like the very foil that carried it, light, fragile, and forgotten. But deep within the data logs of that failed flight, hidden among the clutter and static, a pattern was forming, one no one yet understood. The enemy was laughing, and for now,
They had every reason to.
Spring, 1943. The war was bleeding into its fourth relentless year, and the night skies over Europe had become an inferno of searchlights, sirens, and flak. Every raid cost dozens of lives. Every failure left another town in ashes, another family erased. The scientists at Malvern worked in silence, haunted by the echo of every engine that never came home. Then came a quiet breakthrough, not in power, but in precision. The radar engineers realized that the earlier tests had been flawed not by theory, but by timing. The foil strips, though perfectly cut, were being released chaotically, clumping or scattering unevenly. The radar echoes they created were fleeting, incoherent, a flicker, not a storm. It was Joan Curran who made the decisive correction. She recalculated the drop rate, the altitude, and the size of each bundle. The aluminum strips had to fall like rain, evenly spaced, steady, rhythmic. The pulse of radar had to meet the pulse of gravity. Science had to learn to imitate nature. Each strip would measure 27 centimeters by 2. Each packet would contain precisely 2,000 of them, to be released every minute from the bomber's hatch. Curran's notes were exacting. For the radar to choke, it must drown. Not choke on a single piece, but be buried in a sea of echoes. When the first test was run on a mock range, the result was astonishing. The radar operator, unaware of the experiment, shouted from the other room, "The targets have multiplied, they're everywhere." And then one line in the logbook, "Test successful, radar impossible to interpret." The discovery reached Bomber Command under the dull code name Window. The brass remained skeptical. Churchill hesitated again. If the Germans copied the technique, every Allied radar system could be rendered blind. To deploy it would be to reveal it. But by the summer of 1943, the situation was desperate. Hamburg, the industrial heart of the Reich, was chosen as the crucible. On the night of July 24, 1943, as the first wave of 791 bombers crossed the North Sea, each carried bundles of window, thin, silver, weightless, packed beside the bombs. The order was given. At precisely 00:57 hours, the hatches opened. From the sky poured a blizzard of metal. Millions of tiny mirrors caught the moonlight and tumbled silently downward. For a moment, the air itself seemed to shimmer. Inside German radar bunkers, the operators froze. The screens exploded into light. The clean, distinct traces of aircraft smeared into a storm of reflections. Hundreds of echoes appeared where only a few had been. The controller screamed for recalibration. The systems overloaded. The enemy was everywhere and nowhere. The Würzburg eyes of the Reich had gone blind. The flak gunners fired into the dark, their shells bursting aimlessly. Searchlights swept the void, catching nothing but drifting confetti. The bombers passed them above, untouched, unstoppable. One Luftwaffe report that night read simply, "Our instruments show hundreds of targets. We can no longer distinguish real from false. The sky is filled with ghosts." In the ashes of Hamburg, a new weapon was born. Not a gun, not a bomb, but a trick of perception. A $5 storm of metal had broken the eyes of German science. The scientists who had once been mocked now understood invisibility did not come from vanishing. It came from being everywhere at once. That night, under the moonlit haze of burning Hamburg, the balance of technological warfare shifted forever. The miracle had a name, Window, and the world's first invisible victory had just been won.
The night skies over Europe were never the same again. In the months that followed Hamburg, Window became not an experiment, but a doctrine. Every bomber that took off from British soil carried its payload of destruction and its veil of ghosts. Before each raid, the crews would pack the thin aluminum bundles by hand, their fingers blackened with oil and nerves. The ritual became as sacred as loading the bombs themselves. When the hatches opened, the sky would glitter. Millions of silver fragments fell through the moonlight, twisting and turning like metallic snowflakes. From the ground, civilians would look up and see it drifting down, silent, mesmerizing, almost beautiful. But to the men in the radar bunkers below, it was pure nightmare. On their green-lit screens, reality disintegrated. Clean, straight traces became clouds of chaos. A single formation of bombers appeared as hundreds. Hundreds appeared as thousands. The radar operators shouted into their headsets, their voices cracking with panic. "They're everywhere! There's too many! The whole sky is full of them!" The Würzburg and Freya systems, once symbols of German precision, now betrayed their masters. The signals smeared, multiplied, and pulsed without order. What had been a science became a séance. Men staring into noise, trying to divine truth from static. Anti-aircraft batteries fired blindly into the dark, their shells bursting in empty air. Searchlights sliced through the night, illuminating nothing but drifting ribbons of foil. The more they fired, the more they revealed their own futility. In the ruins of Hamburg, Cologne, and Berlin, survivors began to whisper about the silver rain, the strange glitter that fell before the firestorms. Mothers swept it from their window sills. Children held it in their hands, not knowing it had guided the bombers that burned their homes. The Reich called it Dupel when they finally learned the truth, but by then the damage was done. Their engineers tried to copy it, to reclaim their lost vision, but the balance had shifted. The Allies had already learned to adapt, to evolve faster than the enemy could respond. One captured German report from late 1943 read, "Our radars show a sky full of ghosts. The enemy is invisible. The machines are useless. We are fighting in the dark." The statistics told the story with cold precision. In the months before Window, bomber losses averaged 8 in every 100 sorties. After Window, that number dropped to 2. An 80% reduction in death, achieved not by armor or firepower, but by deception. What began as a $5 trick had become a weapon of terror, not just for the Germans who could no longer see, but for the world that realized invisibility had entered the battlefield. The Luftwaffe's faith in its machines, in the perfection of its science, had been shattered. Every radar pulse, every green sweep across the screen now carried doubt. Was it a bomber or just another phantom? As the Allied bombers thundered above the clouds, dropping both bombs and mirrors, one phrase began to echo through the ranks of the German operators. The British have learned to fight with ghosts. The laughter that had once filled the radar rooms was gone. Now there was only the steady hum of the screens and the sound of men breathing in the dark, surrounded by enemies they could no longer see. The Reich had built an empire of machines to watch the sky, and now that sky was watching back through the reflection of 1,000,000 falling mirrors. By late 1943, Window was no longer just a countermeasure, it was a philosophy, the codified proof that ingenuity could outthink supremacy. What began as a handful of scientists in a cramped lab had evolved into an idea so powerful it rewrote the very laws of technological warfare. The Allies had discovered a truth the Reich could never accept, that chaos, when mastered, was stronger than order. The German war machine worshipped precision, a hierarchy of engineers and officers who believed in the sanctity of numbers, in the purity of control. Their ideology, their science, their pride, all built upon the illusion that the world could be measured, predicted, dominated. But Window was heresy to that belief. It introduced noise into their perfect system, and noise is rebellion. It mocked their certainty, shattered their equations, and replaced their clarity with infinite confusion. The British hadn't just blinded the radar, they had weaponized unpredictability. From the underground labs of Malvern came a new branch of warfare: electronic countermeasures. Invisible waves, false signals, interference, the unseen battlefield of minds and machines. The war for the skies had become a war for perception itself. A German general wrote bitterly after the Hamburg disaster, quote, "The British fight like mathematicians who have gone mad. They do not destroy our machines, they destroy our confidence in them." Unquote. And he was right. The genius of Window was not in the foil, but in the philosophy behind it. The notion that deception could be precision, that confusion could be design, that the human brain, with all its flaws and imagination, could outmaneuver the cold logic of a machine. It was the triumph of adaptability over arrogance. Every bomber dropping its payload of mirrors became a symbol of that doctrine, a message written in silver rain, that power is not found in domination, but in the ability to change, to bend, to think differently. While the Axis built walls of iron, the Allies built illusions. While the Reich trusted in rigidity, the scientists of Malvern trusted in the elegance of imperfection. Freedom had found its weapon in flexibility. Dr. Reginald Jones would later write that Window was a victory not of wealth, but of wit, proof that the mind, when desperate enough, can make a weapon out of almost nothing. And that was the quiet revolution hidden within the roar of engines and the flash of firestorms. That knowledge, unbound by fear or ideology, could turn weakness into strength. In the doctrine of Window, every strip of foil carried a message to tyrants and machines alike. You may see everything and still understand nothing. For the first time in history, the battlefield itself had been rewritten, no longer a contest of steel and numbers, but of signal and silence, perception and deception. The age of electronic warfare had begun, and its first prophet was a $5 storm of silver that taught humanity the most paradoxical lesson of all, that sometimes, to win, you must learn not to be seen. Spring 1945. The Reich was collapsing in on itself, a dying machine choking on smoke and silence. Once, its radar eyes had scanned every horizon, proud and unblinking. Now, they stared into nothing. The screens that once promised dominance showed only noise, ghosts, fragments, shadows. The same generals who had laughed in their polished war rooms now stood among ruins, staring up at skies they no longer controlled. The hum of Allied bombers had become the new sound of inevitability, a thunder rolling from the west, steady, merciless, familiar. They remembered the first time they'd seen it, that strange storm of silver, falling like snow over Hamburg. They had mocked it then. British confetti, they called it. Now, it was a funeral veil for an empire. Window had spread across the world like a quiet contagion. By the war's end, both sides used it, but it was too late for those who had laughed first. The irony was cruel, poetic, exact. The very arrogance that had built the Reich's technological empire had blinded it. A German radar officer captured in the final days of the war confessed to his interrogators, "It was the sound that broke us, the sound of silence, when the screens were full, but we could see nothing. We knew they were there, we just couldn't find them." That silence was the echo of defeat. The men and women who had created Window never fired a gun, never dropped a bomb, never stormed a beach. Yet their work reshaped the air itself. They turned the invisible into a weapon, and the weapon into an idea. They proved that wars are not always won by strength. Sometimes they are won by imagination. And so the story comes full circle. They laughed when they first saw it fall, that strange metallic snow drifting through the night sky. They stopped laughing when they realized that the laughter had been drowned by thunder. Because it wasn't confetti. It was prophecy. From that moment on, every war would be fought not only with bullets and bombs, but with frequencies, deception, and light. Window had opened something larger than the sky. It had opened the door to the modern battlefield, where information itself became the ultimate weapon. The war ended, but the lesson endured. Power without imagination is blindness, and in the hands of the free, even chaos can be turned into order. The thunder spoke, and the sky never belonged to them again.